you. So in the previous week, what we did was we introduced the Seven Hermetic Principles. And as part of that introduction, then we did a kind of overlay on the tree and said if you had to pinpoint where each of these principles may be represented, this would be the place, right? So in review, when looking at the tree and the Seven Hermetic Principles, I didn't pull that screen up, doggone it. Let me pull up those principles here really quick. Hopefully I have that written down somewhere. I'm going to stop share. I apologize for the hiccup. I usually have all of these slides ready in advance. And by the way, if I happen to go too deep for anyone, or if this gets like too muddled, please let me know. The objective of this particular class is to ensure foundation. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking just for foundation. So as part of that, let's share the screen. So last week we discussed the Seven Hermetic Principles, and they are as followed. 1, the all is mind. The universe is mental. This is, without question, the single most difficult concept to sit with, to grasp. It suggests that we live within the dream of the all. And what the all is everything that we see, everything that we experience, the entire universe and everything that would make the universe possible. It is the all with all capital letters. So if there is nothing that is outside of it, so it is everything, right? That particular concept. And then the idea of everything being mental means that we live within the threshold of a paradox where things are and they are not. We are a manifestation of the all, but the all in itself is unmanifest, meaning that to manifest, one must be differentiated from something else. So if nothing is differentiated from anything, if it is the all, so there is no differentiation, there is no uniqueness, there is no separation of quality, then it is unmanifest. It is void. It is it is the emptiness. It is the center point from which all things emerge. So, and that is the unmanifest. The second principle is the principle of correspondence. And this is probably one of the greatest utility principles that we learn about. What it means is that as above, so below, and as below, so above. As within, so without. As without, so within. In other words, there's this correlation of existence where the principles that exist that we see and experience here, they can be reflected in higher realms, in higher dominions, in higher ranges of being. The tree of life provides for us a visualization of that idea and gives us correspondences that are multiple layers deep, so that we have color correspondences, we have numerological correspondences, we have astrological correspondences, we have mythological correspondences. And each of these then inform us of greater knowledge, so that the sum is greater than all the parts, right? The whole. It becomes greater than the sum of its parts. So this principle also allows you to seek relationships between different ideas and between different concepts. So mythologically speaking, it allows for cross-cultural analysis of different archetypes. So if I see a father god who is a king, who has a son, and this god throws around lightning bolts, and his name is Zeus, but his name is also Jupiter, I can look north into the Scandinavian regions of the world and go, wow, but this also looks a lot like Odin, right? I can look to the east and see Raiden. And so these correlations, these correspondencies allow for me to have communion with greater narratives, right? Because I'm able to go, well, this individual has all of these characteristics. For instance, the god Prometheus, his punishment under Zeus for giving man fire, which could be the spirit of consciousness, so a change of state of beings, an elevated state of being, because as we understand in the tree of life, the element of fire is associated with spirit. Then if I am God Zeus and I take Prometheus and bind him to a rock and leave him there and have a eagle peck out his liver, keep in mind the eagle is a symbol also for Jupiter, so same planet. So there's this kind of an aspect of something weakening something else, and if we take it on a planetary level, it would be that binary aspect that exists between Jupiter and the sun. There's another solar character that was also pinned to a rock like that. That's Set, and Horus does the same thing to him. Horus being Jupiter, Set also standing in for the sun. But there's another sun that was also bound to a rock, Golgotha, the skull, and that is the Son of God. So Jesus Christ fulfills that same kind of mythological thing. When we get into the advanced material later, what we'll discover is we'll be discussing what the gods actually are and how important they are and how important it is to understand what they are about. But for the time being, just understand that certain mythological narratives are being repeated, and that repetition is an effort to preserve a core piece of information. It is in fact the beauty of the strength of a story as opposed to a language. Languages are incredibly fluid. They change constantly. They are regularly adapted to express what we think currently. So if I were to go back 500 years, just 500 years into the past, and try to speak English in England, and try to understand anything that they're talking about, it would be virtually impossible because the languages have changed that much. But the thing that hasn't changed are stories. Stories are bulletproof. I know hundreds of stories from Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, Nordic mythology, but I don't speak those languages, but I do understand the narrative structure of symbology and how that relates, and it all ties back to this principle of correspondence. The principle of correspondence also allows us to understand different levels of energetic existence. So when we wish to commune and raise our vibration to commune with our higher self, we are legitimately and in reality communicating with our higher vibratory self. This isn't an alien entity or anything. This is simply you existing within multiple aspects of reality, multiple dimensions, if you want. And those dimensions then are depicted in the tree. The next principle, these are what I consider structural principles, the first two. The rest are operational principles. In other words, the all is mind and the principle of correspondence are basically defining characteristics which will then inform us of what comes next. Keep in mind that each and every sphere, as we work our way down, each and every sphere, and I'm going to switch images here for just a sec so we can go, hey, everybody who just came in. welcome. There we go. Y'all can see that. All right. So when we're considering the seven Hermetic principles, the first two can be visualized in the archetypal realm. We'll switch back to this guy right here. That's a little easier. So the first two can be seen as existent within the archetypal realm, because these are the structural principles upon which everything is built. Everything below them operates under that. Keep in mind, however, that each and every sphere on the tree, the sephira that are present, carry within them a portion of all seven principles. It's just that some spheres really radiate a particular principle greater than others, right? So when we get to the principle of vibration, this is the first point at which reality then is manifesting. And what we see when we look at the tree is that initial manifestation takes place in this blue sphere called Chesed, which is tied to the god Jupiter or Zeus. And that's important to remember that, because these characters these divine characters stand in as avatars and spokesmen for each sphere. So my path to understanding the tree, because mythology is my thing, was to embrace the personification of each sphere and commune with those avatars and find within myself their expression, because each of us will resonate differently. Some of us will like the idea of Jupiter and all the things that Jupiter represents and the outgoing nature, the anabolism of Jupiter, which is this capacity to gather together groups of people or things or ideas or principles or powers. That gathering together is an expression of the formative force that comes out of Binah. That's this black sphere, which is tied to the god Saturn. So the principle of vibration is the essence of first becoming. It also indicates that all things are in motion, all things are active, all things are fluid. They're all in different states. Some vibrate at such a high rate that they might seem to be without motion, and similarly on the other end of the pole, some things vibrate so slowly as to seem to be without motion. But all things are moving and active and moving from one moment to the next. Those principles are exhibited as we move down the tree. And also keep in mind that everything that exists below this upper triad is all happening essentially simultaneously, okay? We differentiate it as this leads to this, but the truth is, for vibration to exist, we must have the next principle, which is polarization. And polarization is found within the sphere of Gevura. So this is Mars. Polarization is catabolism. This is where a thing is broken down into smaller things. I take an X, I cut it in half, and now I have two pieces of wood. This is the process of differentiation along a linear spectrum, so that I can have love and hate on the same line, and I can motivate people to do exactly the same thing under the guise of love or hate. People go to war for things they love or things they hate. Like, it's the same thing. It literally is, and there's a translation that happens between. In the middle is indifference. So in the middle is indifference, where you neither love nor hate. It's a pillar of mildness that exists there. But it still is on that line. And as we move out to the edges, we experience that. So polarization allows and creates the peaks and valleys of the vibratory sine wave. Polarization inherits this ability from Bina as the creative element. And this inheritance is limitation. When looking at the beginning here, and am I going too fast? Just I put the brakes on for just a moment. Is this flowing okay for everyone? I haven't lost anybody. I'm happy to slow down. Everybody doing okay, Heidi? Okay, good. Okay. Just making sure, because the basic, we want to keep basic here. Saturn as a, let's back this up just a second here. And don't forget, we're still talking about the seven Hermetic principles. But when we look at this upper triad, these three objects here, between Chokmah and Binah, what we have is force and counterforce. That idea is going to be really important as we move down the tree. We have the sacred masculine being emanated from Chokmah, which is projection and attraction. And we have the sacred feminine in Binah, which is resistance and reception. Okay. And we see these concepts on every level, from biology and the fertilization of an egg, right? The egg being the sacred feminine, and it is resistance, and then it is receptive, right? Because one comes in, sperm, and the masculine is projective and attractive. So it actually draws things. Anyway, so the idea then is these principles are embodied in every aspect of existence. It is force and counterforce. It is a coaxial flow. And when that emerges down as the principle of vibration and the principle of polarization, we get the sine wave. In the middle of this is the principle of rhythm. The principle of rhythm runs straight down the middle of the tree in the pillar of mildness and is exemplified by the sun, which is seen in this yellow sphere, right, called Tipperet, and it's seen in the moon in this purple sphere called Yesod. So those represent the rhythms which occupy our waking and sleeping consciousness. They represent the rhythms of the seasons, the days, the months, all of that. Rhythms throughout the course of a year, the synodic wave, and that rhythm is what allows for the sine wave to go up and down. The principle of rhythm states that if something rises, it must fall. If it comes in, it must go out. It is a component of the outflow that takes place when Kether projects light into the universe as the crown. We good so far? So the next principle, when we get down these three, Chesed, Geburah, and Tipperet, represent primary creative forces. We are unable to engage directly with these forces except through Tipperet, which the symbol for Tipperet is the hexagram. So that's a triangle that faces up and a triangle that faces down. It is symbolic of the unification of the masculine and the feminine. So you get the idea of the hermaphrodite then at that point. It is symbolic of energy flow from the three lower spheres of the formative world of Yetzirah, which are the green, the orange, and the purple of Netzik, Hod, and Yesod. We'll be talking about Hod later today. We'll talk about all of these later, but and their flow downward into the lowest sphere at the bottom here called Malkut. So the flow upward, when we wish to commune with our higher self, comes from working in these spheres here. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The flow downward is from Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferet. Just think of that hexagram and think of it literally as pointing directions of energy flow. And in the center is mediated all that energy. So we have atonement in the center. Everything is brought together as one, right? It's reconciled. So all of the energy flows are brought there and reconciled in the atonement of the sun. Keep that in mind. Who sits crucified between 4 constellations and has 4 the beasts. Like all of that mythology is centered around the sun and what it does literally for us every moment of every day. Anything you wish to anthropomorphize, one can simply speak to the sun and go, it creates, it turns water into wine simply by the process of rain and, the plants growing and things like that. Like all of those things are part of it. So that is the principle of rhythm. The next thing that develops then as a result of that principle's outflow is the principle of cause and effect. And that resides within another sacred feminine character of Venus, who is an expression of the sacred feminine that we find in Binah. In fact, the masculine and feminine characters within the tree are simply the same 2 actors, just assuming different roles. It's like one of those, Eddie Murphy used to do those movies where he played everybody. And it's very much like that, except for it would be Eddie Murphy and maybe his wife. But they're all dressed up and they play everybody. That's what we're getting here. So the sacred masculine would be Chokmah, and that'd be Eddie Murphy playing all the male roles, and then the sacred feminine would be Binah, and let's say his wife playing all the female roles, and when you realize that the person that you're seeing, the avatar that you are seeing within those areas is just another expression of the same person, then you want to pay attention to what they're doing, how they're standing, because now they're communicating a story. If they're fully clad or if they're unclad, if they're standing on land and water, if they're balancing some cups between their hands, if they're sitting in a throne, then we want to pay attention to the colors because it's the same person, but they're assuming an office. They're assuming an office that is an exemplification of these principles in action. So cause and effect resides in Netzach, and what's really cool is that this is also where the principle of time then comes into play, because one thing leads to the next, one moment leads to the next. It is a principle, because it is green, visually it stands dead center in the visual spectrum. I had a photography friend of mine a long time ago, and he when he'd try to make sure his camera was set correctly, he had a little green card that he would put in front of the camera so that he could zero out the optical spectrum. And he once told me, he's like, I lost my card once and I wound up just losing this leaf, and it worked. And that got me to thinking, because I was like, wow, the color green is a remarkable color. It represents a gateway of sorts. It represents a threshold. On one side is life, and on the other side is death. And it really depends on where you stand. On one side is wellness, and on the other side is illness, right? So if someone says, wow, you look a little green around the gills, what's that mean? It means you look sick. But if we look outside and we look at nature, then we judge its health by how green things are, right? So the idea then is that green is tied intimately to life, and therefore cause and effect and time are about life. Time is not a dimension. Time is a method of counting. That's all it is. And we measure time by counting things. So if we didn't have our sun and the rotation of the earth and the moon circling around us and be able to look up into stars and see the constellations move, with periods of movement relating to other movement, because all of our time is gauged on other time, right? If we want to do a day, then it's the rotation of the earth. If I want to do a month, then it's how many days it takes the moon to circle around the earth. If I want to do a year, then it's how many days it takes to go once around the sun. But each of these are simply me counting. Time does not exist outside of the present, outside of the manifestation of life, which is essential to time. So, and this cause and effect and this relationship then represents that sacred threshold through which all things must pass. The reason the number 7 and Venus is tied to luck is not because she is lucky, but because she represents a change in fortune. So if I am unlucky, then I would plead to Venus as Lady Luck to change my luck and make me lucky. And then I would, once lucky, I would hold on to that and say, let's immobilize the principle of rhythm for a while, because rhythm says if I'm lucky now, I'm going to definitely be unlucky later. And polarize myself to the luck side of things. But the principle of rhythm always has sway in the end, and it always pulls you back. So the cause and effect is presented there. When we get to 8, we we get an interesting concept, which I spent a bit more time on last week, and that is the principle of gender within the tree. We're going to talk about the 8th sphere at great length in the advanced course in a little bit. But for now, the principle of gender is one which we can see within the court cards and the elements of the tarot. The purpose for it being within Hode is because of the nature of the planet Mercury relative to the sun and outer space, so that it's in a locked orbit where one side is facing light and one side is facing darkness. It gives us where the principle of vibration, which is that first manifestation, is seen within Chesed, right? Principle of vibration here. As we move through the principle of rhythm into Hode, we get the beginning of differentiation, which is seen as the creative aspects of the sacred masculine and sacred feminine. In Hode, where the geometry in Chesed is a square, the geometry in Hode is an octagon, which is just one square laid on another, right? So this manifestation then is an illustration of dualism present within the planet Mercury. Now, within all spheres, and you guys, oh good, you can see this. You can see that my little calcite, it's calcite, is got a line through it, right? This perfect fracture point. I love this thing. This has been the greatest teacher of mine for a long time. All spheres in the universe, which include planets and stars, preferentially receive energy through their northern pole, and preferentially expel energy through the southern pole. Last week we talked about this at greater length, but the visualization can be seen within the human body, where everything associated with the head is receptive, and including everything above the heart is receptive. Your hands, your arms, they're designed to pull things towards you. So the upper part of the body could be seen as feminine receptive. The lower part of the body, everything is expressed outward. And the lower part of the body is where we have our motility. So motility, activity, those are associated with sacred masculine, and projection, sacred masculine. So everything we excrete or create as a result of the process of our consumption through the sacred feminine, those things which are transmuted in our body into bones and cells and whatnot, the leftovers then are returned to the earth for the consumption of other things. So the idea then is that there's a creative expression that comes from the body, which is a component of the sacred masculine. So we ourselves are a unification of this. If we become like Mercury, and let's say the sun-facing side is towards you, even though I have a star behind me, but the darkness side is towards me in my dark shirt, right? Then this side is masculine, and this side would be feminine. The upper region, feminine, the lower region, masculine. So if I take this and talk about it in terms of tarot cards, then if I'm coming in through the top on your side, sacred masculine, right? Then this would be the King of Cups or the King of Pentacles, because this would be the masculine feminine, right? Masculine on this side and feminine. On the bottom, I would have the King of Wands or the King of Swords, because that's masculine, right? On the back side, this is all feminine back here. So at the top would be feminine. That would be your Queen of Cups, Queen of Pentacles. On the bottom would be your feminine masculine, your Queen of Swords, your Queen of Wands, right? Bottom projection. So we get this 4-quadrant thing, and that is part of the differentiation process of the principle of gender, which is not speaking necessarily to physical presentation, but the presentation of the personality. So a King of Cups could be seen as someone who was a very caregiving father, let's say. A Queen of Swords could be seen as a woman who is engages in mental activities and debates and things which are projecting outward, right? Because she's seeking to work out into the community, as opposed to be receptive, right? On the top, it would be different. Queen of Pentacles would be your very maternal mother type thing. So these principles then, these 7 principles are the principle of mentalism, principle of correspondence, the principle of vibration, the principle of polarization, the principle of rhythm, the principle of cause and effect, and the principle of gender. Combined together with this, with the tree of life, we can get a better picture of what we're looking at in terms of how the universe is manifesting itself on many, many, many levels. When we look at the tree, so that's the 7 Hermetic Principles. Kind of running overtime here, I apologize. Let's talk about now the 4 worlds within the tree. So the tree of life then is divided into 4 worlds. These 4 worlds are, the primary is at the top, right? And I'm going to take just a moment and I want to describe the sword and the chalice. The sword is like this. It's a masculine idea, right? In the military, you get chevrons, okay, which represent the more, and it's sort of the phallus. So the more chevrons you have, the more phallus you have, right? It means you're more in charge of more. The chevron going down, like if you're in the Navy, then that's the feminine. I served in the Navy. It's because in the Navy, you're a component of the sacred feminine because of the ocean, right? The sea of bitterness is what you sail upon. So your rank and authority comes from that, right? So if you're on the other, it's the other way. When looking at the tree, the supernal triad, the 3 at the top, all represent an expression of masculine force. Even though Binah is sacred feminine, it still is an expression of masculine force because of the principle of gender as expressed in the initial manifestation. What does that mean? Every sphere, as it descends downward, every sphere that is beneath the sphere above it is receptive of the energy of the sphere above it. To be receptive, one must have feminine. And as I told you, The spheres are receptive from the top and projective to the bottom. So that same idea of the universe and stars and planet Earth and everything else being receptive to the top and projective through the bottom is also seen within the tree of life. So as things project out of Keter into Chokmah, and from Chokmah into Binah, we have a projection of masculine into feminine receptive, which then projects out into the rest of the universe as masculine. So this is why Saturn, a masculine god, is assigned to Binah. It explains that answer for you, because the archetype of Saturn, a masculine god, father of the younger gods like Zeus, is projecting that force that it receives from Chokmah and putting that into the first manifestation of Chesed, that vibration that happens there. So the chalice is everything that is beneath the sacred, the supernal triangle at the top of Absolute, which is the archetypal world. So, and everything after that is predominantly feminine shifted. It will be masculine shifted as it projects its energy out from one sphere to the one beneath it, but it's ultimately feminine shifted. So that's why when we look at the tree, there is a break right here at Da'at. It's that separation. This is the imaginary sphere of the tree. It represents the void. It represents this vastness, which if crossed relates in a translation of your person. So you become like Enoch and walk with God and are no more, because there's no going back once you've crossed that, and nor would you want to, really. I mean, it's like your life's work to get there. You're like, nope, I changed my mind. No, just kidding. So when working down then, the absolute, and this also explains why the element associated with the upper triad is masculine, which is fire. When working into the next triad down, it shifts to feminine. And the shift is expressive of water. This isn't wet water. This is the creative aspect of water that becomes consciousness. It's the emotional plane, and consciousness is differentiated from mind, which exists in the next plane down within Yetzirah, which is the formative world. But as we move from Braya and water into Yetzirah in the formative world, this is the astral plane. This is where all the stuff is beginning to gel and turn into something. This is the place where and between these two pillars, the pillar of mercy and the pillar of severity, we have in the pillar of mercy, we see fulfilled within Netzik the undifferentiated mind. It's everything. When we get into Hod, we begin to see the first inklings of true differentiation, right? Because of that principle of gender. So where in Netzik, it's this big kind of everything's in there, and it is all things. By the time you get into Hod, it inherits that polarization trait from Gevura and is able to begin to create smaller things from that greater unified mind. We're going to talk about that in greater length there in a few minutes in the advanced course. But for now, recognize that the formative world exists then within these principles of the total mind and a separate mind. We'll talk about that more. As we work into the final world, this is the physical world. That's where we live. That's Malkut. It's the very bottom of the tree. This is the culmination of all the work of all the spheres above it. And it is here that we get to see a reflection of the glory of Keter, which is at the very, very top. It means that everything that is around us is sacred, because it is the purposeful distillation of spirit, body, and mind into actualization. It is only here where we can actually be. Everything else is a product of becoming. It's a process of becoming. All those 7 principles have to run into play before we can get to Malkut and see them realized in the material world. So as much as we'd like to think less of ourselves, the truth is the work that we accomplish here is really for the unification, if not salvation, of our higher selves. As we employ ourselves physically where work can be done because we are a living soul, which means we're a unification of spirit and body, right? Then that means we can bring those separate forces together momentarily and do something with them, like something important. And that's why this place, why being here is so critical. The higher self can't get any work done. All it can do is nurture us to make the work happen. And then, because it's not doing anything, it's just reaching out, going, please, hello, are you there? And then when we're finally ready to elevate our vibration sufficiently so that we can have communion, it's still us that gets all the work done. We may have spiritual support, emotional, mental support from those higher selves, but it's truly us upon which the work is left to do. So that's a review in brief of the tree, the 7 principles of the 7 esoteric principles, and the 4 worlds of the tree and Kabbalah. These 4 worlds also exist within each sphere. And we talked about that in brief last time, but you can see in this diagram, which is considerably more complicated, that each sphere in and of itself has 4 worlds. So when we read the tarot cards, that's the 4 suits of the tarot. So if I have the aces, then I have 4 cards, which is symbolic of 4 worlds. That tells you something. That means that there are there's a unification going, there's a stratification going. There exists within each of these levels of the tree a kind of superiority, so that at the top within the supernal triangle, the element of fire is superior. So all of the suits of wands then would be well dignified, as Crowley might suggest, in those areas, because cups reside within the sphere of Brahma and water, then all the suit of cups would be well dignified. So seeing a cup in 4 or 5 or 6, those cups are going to present better. And similarly, as we go down the tree, each of those elements demonstrate who has dominion within that level. So that's the tree in a nutshell. That's the most basic presentation, short of just kind of, we're going to do more. We're going to definitely talk about the color relationships of the tree next week and show how the fusion of primary colors philosophically informs us of what the secondary colors are about. So when we're looking at, for instance, the orange of Hod, we know that orange is created by combining red and yellow, which means Gevurah and Tipperet. So those elements then create the child of that sphere beneath it. And then we'll talk about complementary opposites as well, because that'll be important. So that's it for today, you guys. Do you have any questions? Is there anything else I can help go back on? Anything?
I've probably noticed it before, but for some reason, looking at the tree chart today, if anyone has any experience with the Gnostic Mass, it was so clear that the spheres that form the chalice on the bottom, with dot being that cake that the priest, and maybe it's in a regular Mass as well, I'm not as familiar, but they hold the little bread above the cup as the sphere of Thoth going into the Grail. It was like so obvious to me looking at that chart on my iPad. That's very cool. The symbolism
It
there.
is actually, that although I'm no longer Catholic, but the symbolism in the sacrament of various masses is quite well done, because they borrow from other older symbolism. So when you see the sacrament presented there with the bread and the wine, this is actually and then the altar there, that's hearkening back to old temple stuff in the Old Testament. And the same elements are present there on the table of shewbread, right? That are present within the Catholic Mass. It's showing a line of connection, symbolic authority that relates to certain ideas. And that transubstantiation that takes place with the consumption of the sacrament, while some speak to it in terms of a literalness, the true transubstantiation is what takes place spiritually, in recognition, like cognitive recognition of what it is you're actually consuming. It's a symbol of something else, which is a process which is associated with multiple other symbols and processes. So that's why when one takes of the sacrament of any form, it should be done in a meditation. We really don't do that. You see people walk up and, body of Christ, and there you are, and then you move on. But really, and that's because there's a long line. But as you're waiting in that line, that's the point of contemplation. And then the continued point of contemplation is after the consumption. So yeah, anything to make those things more valuable in my mind is a good thing. Like, I'm not opposed to that in terms of the practice, because I have found over time that many paths can lead to enlightenment. There's not just one. There's many of us out there. Our brains are all wired differently. And so the approach here is unique. What appeals to us here is definitely anathema to others, because it can be overburdened with too much technicality and we get confused. So, and then we lose ourselves. Well, thank you, you guys. We're going to take just a couple minutes, and then I'll pick up. I'll go ahead and start the next class, but I'm going to just take a moment and freshen up, if that's all right with you guys. Thank you very much. This is awesome. I'll see you all in a few minutes. I'll start the other one right now, though.